Welcome to Worldview Matters, discussing controversial issues, discerning current events, defending biblical Christianity. No topic off limits. And now, here's your host, David Fiorazzo.
Well, hello, friends. Hopefully you're sitting down. You're in for a treat today. I have Dr. Jake Jacobs with us. Before we get to him, because we're going to answer the question, what on earth happened to U.S. college campuses? We're going to talk about Hamas. We're going to talk about anti-Semitism. We'll probably mention China and Marxism and all kinds of good stuff to give you a better understanding on what is brewing and has exploded recently. But before we do that, I want to thank some friends who have been donating to Worldview Matters. Peggy, most recently, from Baroon, Minnesota. Thank you, Peggy. Also, Pamela from Traverse City, Michigan. Tim from Green Bay, Wisconsin. And last week, we shouted out to New York, Mexico City, Iowa, Lakeville, Illinois, and in recent, within a month, Ohio, North Carolina. So we're getting around thanks to you. And we have an opportunity. We're doing a fundraiser here this week and part of next to expand our reach with the help of Pioneer Network, Beck TV, and God's Learning Channel. So if you have not already donated to Worldview Matters and you are financially able, we don't want to, have people, give out of obligation or if things are really tight for you financially, just pray for that God would continue to expand our territory. But if you want to help us out, we're raising money for the next 6 months of production costs, and one-time gift of $200 is what we're looking for, or a recurring monthly gift of $25, and you can get a free book. We'd love to send you Alex Newman's brand new book, Indoctrinating Our Children to Death, or you have a choice. You can get my new book, Assault on the Image of God, and that's for free. If you're a first-time donor, we'll send you my nifty mug. Not mine, but Freedom Project's mug. Worldview Matters on one side. Keep speaking the truth about things that matter. My tagline on the back. So go to worldviewmatters.tv, and your gifts are tax deductible. Now, are you ready? Fasten your seatbelts, because we've got Dr. Jake Jacobs with us today. You've probably seen his One Nation at FreedomProject.com, and this guy knows more about history than almost anyone I know, at least American history and world history and actually the facts, and is going to help explain some things to us today on how we got to where we are with the hatred and the poisonous environment of radicalism and anti-Semitism on college campuses. Welcome in studio, Dr. Jake Jacobs. Hi, brother.
Hello, David. I tell you, it's great to be here. I'm happy to be here, but I'm also very sad about the topic that's been chosen, because it's a sad reflection on what the Marxists predicted they were going to do 100 years ago, and it's come to fruition, and this is what we have to live with.
Well, let's go back, because this is by design, what we're seeing. This just didn't happen in the last couple of years. Right. This has been brewing. It is a planned, really takeover, Marxist infiltration, but we've got Hamas now, pro-Hamas rallies, and you've got the problem with the lack of world history taught in the K through 12 system, and they're putting out social justice activists already, so they think they're just, and a lot of these videos that are coming out recently, a lot of these young people, not all of them, a lot of them don't even know why. They don't understand why they're there supporting him, but they're shouting all the, anti-Israel stuff. So go back to, 100 years? And how did this start?
Well, I know time is short, so let's just say approximately 100 years ago, people you and I have discussed before, we've written about, Antonio Gramsci and others, who in essence says, look, we're not going to take over the American Republic or destroy Christian civilization necessarily through a barrel of a gun. We're going to do it actually through the implementation of the 3 C's, the culture, the churches, and the curriculum. And so fast forward, you're talking 1960s, and you have a branch of leftism called the New Left. And the New Left, they were hardcore leftists from Students for a Democratic Society, Democratic Socialists of America, etc. They said, our goal is to infiltrate the culture. Now, granted, it's true. 1968, 69, Days of Rage, they were in the streets of America calling for a revolution and to destroy our republic under God. But they recognized and realized something coming into the early 70s. It's not going to happen through a barrel of a gun. We have to get our EDDs, our PhDs, and we have to get into the classroom. So around the time that you see the Derek Bell critical race theory individuals developing their racist theories, their anti-white, anti-Jewish, anti-Republic under God theories, also was developing this new leftism, which in essence says we're going to create a new paradigm of Marxism. No longer is it the haves and the have-nots. It's the white and the white-nots, so to speak. The whites are the evil haves, and the white-nots are everybody else included within this gender or identity politics, which is going to infiltrate into the system. And it's very interesting because it was Todd Gitlin, who was a radical member of the Students for Democratic Society out of Columbia University, right, who ended up becoming a professor of sociology at Columbia, who in the 70s says, you know, we lost the politics. That horrible Nixon became president, Reagan became the governor of California, daring to get rid of Black Panthers on campus, etc. But he says, you know what we did? We won the textbooks. We won the textbooks. And I got goosebumps thinking of that, because when I was going to graduate school and working on my doctorate, you could see this stuff coming in to the curricula when I was going to school in this particular time period. We're talking mid-'80s, late 80s. Critical race theory was introduced in '89. The new leftism had been flourishing with Marxist professors from Columbia, Madison to Berkeley, and they've taken over the administrative state within the universities, and now that curricula has gone from law schools, graduate schools, college universities, into high schools, middle schools, elementary schools, permeating all throughout government institutions. And along the way, about the time the Palestinian Liberation Organization, Yasser Arafat wearing his swastika of the day back in the 60s, you think it's a coincidence that the Soviet Union, Nikita Khrushchev and Brezhnev and others joined with the so-called Palestinian situation? Yasser Arafat is Egyptian, by the way. He's not Palestinian, right? But to join hand in foot, hand in glove, meant to say, to work with the Marxists and the Palestinians to go back to that same old whites and white-nots, have and have-nots, that we are the oppressed and we must decolonize the evil white supremacists so we can liberate ourselves and, in essence, usher in this beautiful, whether it's a utopia or Palestinian state of eternal bliss.
Wow. There's so much there, Jake. How does the DEI agenda play into this? Because we're talking, obviously the most recent revelation is the rabid anti-Semitism on college campuses. Where did that come from? Because kids aren't that hateful toward the Jews when they come out of high school. Or are they?
No,
but when they get to the college campuses.
Some high schools in Chicago, San Francisco, Philadelphia, it's already there. It's already
in the
there.
high schools, okay.
But by the time they get done, to quote Alex Newman, by the time they're done being indoctrinated or brainwashed, they now have had a worldview, and it does matter, right? They now have a worldview that is perniciously full of Judenhass, Jew hate, anti-Semitism. And really what's happened is this DEI, this critical racist theory or critical race theory, which was in essence an indictment that all white folk, regardless of who they are or what they've done in their lives, they're all guilty of perpetual, eternal, systemic racism, which of course is a lie from the pit of Gehenna, right? It is a lie, but the point is, within critical race theory was the idea that, in fact, it was Kimberly Crenshaw who created the term intersectionality, along with Derek Bell, when they introduced this in 1989 in Madison, Wisconsin, of all places, where they said, look, what we have here is we need to implement, for those of us, the BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, people of color, DEI, we have to have diversity. We'll include all people, and inclusiveness will include all people except for whites. Now, it's ironic because a lot of these advocates of critical race theory were white themselves, so they had to re-identify themselves as being non-white whites or non-white woke whites. I mean, you follow what I'm saying? Yeah. Because when people were pointing out, well, wait a minute, what's her name? D'Angelo. I forgot her first name now. She was white. She's Italian. You know, she's Italian white. And all of a sudden, before you know it, well, we've got to make sure that these whites are no longer considered whites, and the new bad whites are the Jews. I know this all sounds bizarre and discombobulated, crazy talk, but if you go into that world of critical race theory, in the world of DEI, which is racist in itself, they use this kind of discombobulated gobbledygook language, which is readily and easily pointed out as being racist by its very nature. It is the antithesis of the civil rights movement of the 50s and 60s. It's the antithesis of the vision of black and white abolitionists of the 1850s who wanted to stop Democratic Party systemic racism that led to the Civil War and Jim Crow and black codes and all those things after the Civil War, all the way up to when I was a kid, when you had the movement of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. But these individuals like Derek Bell and Kimberly Crenshaw and Cornel West and many others, they have become anti-civil rights advocates, because they say, in essence, the power structure, the political structure, was actually a white supremacist political structure, and therefore it must be eradicated. Yep. I know this sounds crazy, but when you get into that world, and by the way, I'd highly recommend Christopher Rufo's American Cultural Revolution, because he is a phenomenal expert on this, where he goes with the radical new left of the 60s, Herbert Marcuse, Angela Davis, the Marxist professor at University of California, who ran to be the vice president of the Communist Party USA in 1980, 1984, when Ronald Reagan beat her by a landslide. And those were she and people like her and Bill Ayers and Bernardine Dohrn, the non-friends of Barack Obama, right, who are in campuses down in Chicago at Northwest and University of Chicago, Illinois. They were teaching the future teachers of America. They were teaching people like me when I was in education program at Arizona State University. And then we ended up becoming the teachers of the next generation. And now that generation is lock, stock, and barrel. They're walking goose step with hardcore leftist Palestinian advocates on college campuses from Columbia all the way to Berkeley.
Great book, by the way. Chris Rufo has done some fabulous work. I have it. I haven't read the whole thing yet, but I love Rufo. I get his newsletter. And in fact, we have a minute before we have to pause here briefly. Rufo has been sharing. He sends out some great information, and he's on Substack, Shaping the Narrative on Decolonization. He wrote about how public opinion has shifted on the pro-Hamas campus protests. And one of the things he says, and just get your response before we break, Dr. Jake Jacobs, he says the pro-Hamas protests on university campuses emerged as a surprise, and really they caught a lot of people off guard. We didn't see what was brewing and what had already been, set up, so to speak, because the stage was set for all this. It was just the perfect storm, it seemed. But the spectacle was rooted in an ideology, decolonization, or post-colonial theory that had long been germinating on campus. So some Americans get this. A lot of people are still trying to figure out how they've become so radicalized. And so your comment on Rufo and that it has been brewing for a long time, this ideology.
Right. Once again, when I went on my tangent about we won the textbooks, this is the manifestation, the fruition of winning the textbooks, because the cover of U.S. News and World Report back in 1982, it had a picture of Karl Marx, and it said Marxism or communism in our classrooms. Howard Zinn, his classic tome on a history of people's history of the United States of America. He was a self-professed Marxist who said, I'm a political activist. That was the #1 selling book in social studies departments across America. I know. I was there. And when I would bring this up to my boss or the superintendent, or go to social studies conventions down to Madison, and I would challenge these individuals that saying these are anti-American, anti-Christian writers and authors who have a political agenda.
Right.
And so the point is those individuals influence a generation and now another generation who are the teachers. By the way, these aren't just college kidocrats on college campuses. Their professors are there with them. In fact, if we have, we have to go for a break now.
We should. When we come back, we'll go to that. You've got something to... Yeah, we've got to take a break with Dr. Jake Jacobs, and we'll be right back on Worldview Matters. A lot more to come.
Today's show is brought to you by Harbinger's Daily. World news biblically understood. Stay informed at harbingersdaily.com.
Hey friends, if you know someone who's interested in sponsoring Worldview Matters, send us an email and our producer will get right back to you. worldviewmatters@fpeusa.org. Dr. Jake Jacobs, you wanted to go to a picture, a photographic, and you can talk about what we left off talking about.
Okay, so what we're seeing now, this is a picture of President Biden at Moorhead College in Atlanta, Georgia, which is where Martin Luther King went to school, and Spike Lee, by the way. Okay, now it's a famous black university. It's been around since right after the Civil War. But here's the point: if you see President Biden giving his speech, and all of a sudden, as he gives up to give his speech, a professor on campus, a radical Marxist professor by the name of Samuel Livingston, holds up the Democratic Republic of Congo flag. There was a reason for that. If we could go back to that picture again, because he's showing the flag of Congo, because in essence he's saying white supremacists did this. We need to decolonize because look what the whites did to Africa and look what they've done. He's a part of a Pan-African Marxist movement. And the point is, this is an amalgamation, a joining together of various leftist groups, hardcore leftist groups, Palestinian groups, Marxist groups that are working in collusion to undermine and destroy our republic, to poison the minds of our children. And so that professor, along with thousands of other professors at Berkeley and Madison and Columbia and Arizona State, unfortunately, my alma mater, these are the ones that are brainwashing these students into believing that Israel is involved in genocidal activities, that Israel wants to kill all the kids of Gaza, and all these lies. And there's ahistorical activities going on. They don't know their Middle Eastern, Jewish, Arab history. I mean, when you think of it, one of the greatest colonizers in the history of the world is Islam, is the Arab country. There are 22 Arab countries. There's 57 Islamic countries. There's almost 2 billion Muslims, 25% of the world's population, and they have colonized, they have conquered, they have taken over, and nobody says anything about that. You see, it's horrible Israel and horrible America, the evil white supremacists. And by the way, in that Biden speech, listen to what he said. If black men are being killed on the streets, we bear witness. For me, that means to call out the poison of white supremacy to root out systemic racism. So there he was with the race card again, quoting critical race theory, Claptrap and his DEI, that it's all the whites are the bad guys. And here's the bizarre thing about it. Joe Biden is a white racist himself, but it doesn't matter because he plays the part and he's the puppet that is used by these leftists to achieve their goal.
Jake, do you think that the average American sees through this and understands a little bit of what we're talking about, what you've explained? Does the average American look at a Biden speech like this or what's happening and go, come on, there's a lot of ignorance here, not everyone's behind this? Or because the narrative has definitely been out there, the talking points, the Marxist marching orders.
Dave, that's a brilliant question. Absolutely perfect. Because look, you know, I can pontificate about the intricacies of critical race theory and DEI and its origin historically, going back 100 years and then coming to fruition in the 60s. We can go all through that. But the average American, full of common sense, decency, the love of humanity, the love of thy neighbor, who are not racist, you know, from Albany, New York, all the way through Washington, California, California, Arizona, Nebraska, all across this country, the people that watch your show and my show, they cut right through this this balderdash, this claptrap of lies, these satanic lies, and so they don't have to know the minutia. They don't have to know the details. They can surmise by listening to the verbiage, and also by seeing the actions of men and women, not just college age, but many of them, a significant number from outside of the campuses, wrapped up in masks so they can't see their faces, so they cannot be identified, because they're just like the radicals of the 60s. They believe now is the season. I wrote the book Mob Rule in 2020. Well, look out, 2024, come the Democratic National Convention in Chicago. Wow. Remember in 68 when the hardcore radicals were rioting and calling for a communist revolution in the streets of Chicago? Same thing, I guarantee, is going to happen. They're planning for it right now with various hardcore leftists, Marxists, Antifa, Black Lives Matter, and Palestinian organizations that are telling the kiddies, high school and even middle school, high school, and college age and beyond, to flock to Chicago, to flock to the big cities and disrupt the system. Okay,
Cloward Piven, overwhelm the system. I was going to ask you that. You just partially answered, but I would love for you to elaborate on that. Will this spill over, what we're seeing on the college campuses, into city streets like we saw in 2020 with Antifa and Black Lives Matter, Global Network Foundation, and the billions of dollars in damage, and for a good cause, though, right? Yeah. But the kids that were involved, and I want to say kids, you know, you and I are older, so we can, anyone under 30, we can say kids, right. But young people. So you're just saying, what I think I understood you say is, get ready, especially Chicago. This will be off the campuses and into some city streets. Will it affect the election in November?
Look, when I wrote my book, Mobocracy,
you need to revise that and come out with a new updated version.
Well, Mob Rule was Mobocracy too. But the point is, when I wrote that book, was that 10 years ago already? You know, the culture and political war to destroy our republic under God. I talked about the various things we've discussed, and you talk about all the time. And the fact of the matter is, what you see happening. I was just on the border here when I went to. I spent the winters in Arizona, and I went down to the border again, and it was 10 times worse this time than it was a year ago when I was there. And what's my point? When you have got literally millions and millions of illegal aliens violating our all, arrogantly demanding more from the hardworking American taxpayers, right? And they're flooding up into the city of Chicago. You can find this out. The mayor of Chicago and the assembly people in Chicago are incredibly nervous because South Chicago has been inundated with Venezuelan illegals who are capturing certain neighborhoods and saying, don't even come near here. And there are many black Americans who are at the point now where they're saying, enough already. They're not necessarily angry at white folk. They're angry at illegal folk. They're angry at the system, the Democratic Party, which has perpetuated this madness. And that's not just happening in South Chicago, by the way. It's happening in Philadelphia, Los Angeles, San Francisco, and other major urban centers in Washington, D.C. And I'm telling you, all it's going to take is one black child or one incident where a Venezuelan kills somebody, and it's the George Floyd on steroids. And that's why right now the Democrats are very concerned about having their convention in the heart of Chicago.
So you're saying this summer, knowing there's an election in November, because if you look throughout the years of the protests, nothing, nothing, nothing. 2016, there were some protests. Then nothing, nothing, nothing. 2020, protests. Here it is, 2024. So you're saying this summer, look out, depending on where you live, we're going to see this.
Look, time is of the essence. It's short, but if we could list all the various Palestinian left-wing organizations, Marxist organizations, they're all giving a clarion call. They're all saying it's time to unite. It's time for us, e pluribus unum, right? Out of many various factions, let's join together, because the common denominator that joins us together is our hatred for the American Republic under God, our hatred for the Judeo-Christian worldview, our hatred for the Jewish people and the nation of Israel. That will join us together in a cohesion of political activity. There are organizations that are involved in college campuses that are actually engaging and educating young kids in social media, high school age, to go to a big rally coming up in a few days in Washington, D.C.
Wow.
And the call is like they're socialist teachers who are saying now's the time to activate, to engage, and to put the Democratic Party's feet to the fire and make them bow to our will, our demands.
Well, I remember back in, was it 2010, when they were trying to recall who they called Hitler, Governor Scott Walker in Wisconsin. There were socialists. The communist fist was very prevalent at UW there, the state capitol in Madison, Wisconsin. There were tables for the Socialist Party USA signing people up, saying recruiting young people, kids. That's what they do. They're recruiting. But there's some strange bedfellows in all of these. You say, how did you say that they're all coming together for this common cause? But there's some that ideologically really have some differences. The most obvious, and we only have a couple minutes left, Jake, the most obvious would be the LGBTQ community and Hamas and Islam. You're going, wow, how do these possibly come together? But it is a demonic agenda. That just kind of proves it, doesn't it? It's
the cognitive dissonance.
Yes.
The absolute cognitive dissonance.
Yes,
where you've got lesbians or gays or transgenders for Palestine. They would last 3 seconds in Gaza. They would be hung from the highest pole, and they would be used as an example of the evil nature of who they are. But, they're the useful idiots Lenin talked about. These individuals, they don't have a historical reference, a theological reference. They're the tail wagging the dog. They don't have a clue what they're getting involved in.
Wow. And one more thing, and we just have a minute and a half. Our friend Alex Newman in early May put out the fact George Soros and the Rockefellers have in part been funding this pro-Hamas revolution on campuses, and he gets into detail there. Just your quick thoughts on that, because there's a lot of left-wing money funding what we're seeing happen.
The same organizations, Rockefeller Foundation, Soros, whose son's Alex now is taken over. The Fitzger family, the governor of Illinois.
Yeah.
Pritzker. Pritzker. I meant Pritzker, yeah. They have been flooding, and by the way, they're Democratic Party donators. They've been flooding in millions of dollars into this because that's what they want. They want the Trojan horse to disrupt the American political system. And by the way, Qatar, UAE, Muslim nations, that money's been flooding in here.
China.
Communist China. This is wearing us out from within.
Yeah, and we're going to see, hopefully, I don't know, I hope there's more pushback, because November's going to be here before we know it. It's going to be a fascinating year, friends. Dr. Jake Jacobs, wish we had more time, but thank you for your expertise, and this was good. Good conversation.
Man, we just scratched the surface.
I know. Which means we have to have you back. Can I get you on record that you'll come back?
I will. I'd love to.
All right. We share the same studio, friends. Just if you didn't know, you can go to freedomproject.com/onenation, and you can hear Dr. Jake bloviate on all kinds of important topics. But anyway, guys, thank you so much again for sharing the show and for tuning in. God bless you, and as always, keep speaking the truth about things that matter.